In early 1789, in one of the most famous moments in Royal Naval history, Captain Bligh in the South Pacific suffered a mutiny amongst his crew on HMS Bounty, and he was put to sea with a small group of loyal sailors in one of the ship's boats. What followed is one of the epics of maritime history. He sailed thousands of miles across the South Pacific to arrive in British-held Australia. This replica of that boat has recently completed that journey, sailed by Conrad Humphreys, the legendary Devon sailor. And today I'm on board to have a look. What a beautiful vessel!
She's stunning, isn't she? Yeah. She's become a little bit an old friend now.
Well, you've done enough miles.
Yeah, it's incredible to have a boat like this, and actually not only a replica, but to have done the voyage as well. It's the only one in existence.
I mean, I've always read about that voyage, but being on it, it is so small.
It feels actually quite big to me now, but everybody who gets on this boat goes, I can't believe it, you really sailed 4,000 miles in this tiny little thing. And people struggle to even venture from a harbour, and yet you can take a tiny boat like this 4,000 miles across an ocean. We really need to brave up a bit, I suppose.
But going back to the 18th century, this would have been a ship's sort of support boat, would it, for transporting crew to and from shore, stuff like that?
Exactly that. It was just a support boat. His original boat was built on the Isle of Wight and was clinker. Lots of people said at that time it wouldn't have been clinker, but
it was a clinker.
And he wanted it to be able to sail. I think at heart he just loved, sailing as well.
I didn't realise it was a clinker-built boat, which is, well, like how the Vikings built their boat, overlapping wooden planks.
That's right. Around that time, a lot of boats were sort of carvel, or planks were sort of butted together. History's not absolutely sure of this, but it looks like Bligh had a clinker boat and built on the Isle of Wight.
And they sail a bit better, do they?
I think they sail a bit better. They're easier to repair if you have a problem.
True, yeah.
What's remarkable is Bligh, when you look at his logs, he would do sometimes as many as 140 miles in a day. And of course, they're being blown along by the trade winds in the South Pacific. But we were very similar. We never really did less than sort of 100 miles a day. And I think our top was about 140. Just goes to show, you don't need great modern technology to cruise big distances.
William Bligh was a young, highly capable sailor from a fairly humble background. He'd accompanied Captain Cook on one of his expeditions into the Pacific. And so he was the perfect man to command this journey, which was a mix of a naval operation, but also scientific, because it involved transporting plants from one part of the world to another. Breadfruit would be collected in Tahiti and then transported to the slave plantations of the Caribbean. And so the normal rhythms of the ship, where people lived, the little spaces, the personal space, would be broken down, and it would become a test of solidarity and fellowship aboard the little Bounty. The Bounty was effectively a floating greenhouse. It was going to collect this fruit, this breadfruit, to be taken to the other side of the world, and that meant no Marines were embarked. There was not space to accompany the Marines. In the 18th century, Marines were a key part of any ship's company. They were red-coated soldiers at sea, effectively. And they would sleep and eat between the sailors and the officers. And that was partly to enforce separation and give everybody their own space and their own some element of privacy. But it was also to ensure discipline, because if the sailors did rise up and attempt to take control of the ship, the Marines would be standing in the way. And on this particular voyage, so much space had to be made for the breadfruit that no Marines were embarked. So the sailors and the officers were together on that ship in even more cramped conditions than normal. I've headed over to the National Maritime Museum, part of the Royal Museums Greenwich, where curator and Bligh expert Dr. Rob Blyth is going to show me around their Bounty exhibition. So tell me about the legendary breadfruit. What is breadfruit?
Breadfruit is essentially a fibrous fruit that obviously can be eaten. So this is going to be something that's cheap and nutritious and easy to grow. Large parts of the ship are going to be given over to the breadfruit plants, so they have to make considerable adaptations, which means that people are displaced on board ship. Normally officers would be at the stern, occupying cabins there, and then you would have marines, and then men would be on the gun deck. Large parts of the stern cabin have been taken over for breadfruit, so everyone is out of kilter. Everything now really relies on Bligh's authority, his ability to command. And of course, he's not Captain Bligh, he's actually Lieutenant Bligh. So he's actually a junior officer who is stepping up, as it were.
Bligh had been given a solo command, a ship, a mission, and a lot of responsibility. But he had not been given the one thing he craved most, a promotion to the rank of captain. He would do a captain's job, but without the title. There was a worry that his crew wouldn't respect his authority, given he was a mere lieutenant. Sadly, we're not in Tahiti at the moment, but we're coming out of Plymouth, which is actually appropriate because Bligh was a West Countryman, wasn't he? He was from around here.
Yeah, he grew up here. His dad was the customs officer here, and he would have learnt his trade up and down the Tamar, I should think.
In his early career, did he set himself out as a great seaman, as you know, as well as a naval officer?
He was a ship's cabin boy at the age of 7.
Right.
So he started from a very, very young age and was always kind of earmarked for kind of greater and greater things. I don't know, whether his naval career was as brilliant as he would have liked it to be, and he had a few sort of setbacks. It took a while for him to get his various commands, but there was no doubting his talent. He was an extraordinary navigator. I just don't think he was a brilliant people person, which probably in that world made a difference.
What do we know about his character? Do you think he wasn't the man for that job?
Key thing is that Bligh is an extremely skilled seaman and navigator, but an 18th century naval officer also needs to be a gentleman. It's through your gentlemanliness that authority will flow. And Bligh isn't quite a gentleman. He is prone to towering rage, fits of extraordinary explosive bad temper, and foul language that undermines the confidence of his men in him being a gentleman officer. You've got on board Bligh's young gentlemen, which include Fletcher Christian, and there is clearly, as it were, a social divide between Christian, from a very wealthy background, and Bligh. And I think you begin to get frictions taking place even as early as the incident at Cape Horn.
But did they respect his sailing ability?
Oh, there was no question about his sailing ability. He had, of course, sailed with Cook on his 3rd voyage, so he knew the Pacific well, and he knew how to handle a ship. That was not a problem.
Even so, it wasn't smooth sailing right from the beginning, was it?
No, the idea was that they would come down the Atlantic and essentially sail round South America and enter the Pacific that way. But they faced appalling weather conditions at Cape Horn. You would be seasick, things would be thrown about in the ship. It would be absolutely miserable.
They got beaten back by the conditions, so eventually turned around, sailed with the southern roaring 40s round Australia and up to Tahiti that way.
That's just savage.
Savage. Can you imagine, after all that time, they land on Tahiti, the beautiful Tahitian girls show some interest. It's not surprising there was a mutiny, really.
They have just spent weeks ashore in a tropical paradise. They have all fallen in love with various local women, and suddenly they're being put back on board a ship that they dislike, essentially to become nursemaid to a bunch of plants that they're going to take to the other side of the world. And it's really like your holiday being cut short. They are not happy chaps.
He forced them all to leave Tahiti, and then how soon does the trouble start?
They get as far as Tonga, and 25 miles off the coast there, the mutiny happens.
Well, what you've got essentially is Bligh being woken up in the morning of the 28th of April, and essentially he has lost control of the ship. He has not lost control of the majority of his men, but he's lost control of those armed officers beneath him. Bligh and 18 loyal seamen are pitched out into an open boat.
Some of the loyalists that wanted to stay with Bligh. I think there were probably one or two that sort of hedged their bets with the mutineers. In the end, there was only space for 18 people. I mean, in fact, there wasn't really space for 18 people. 18 people got in the boat. There were others that probably wanted to, and actually on the record in terms of the court-martial were freed because they said there wasn't space for them to get in the boat, and so they were let off. But yeah, extraordinary that even Bligh allowed 18 to get in the boat with him.
The idea of the mutineers is that essentially Bligh and his loyal men will simply sail across to a nearby island and that will be it. They do exactly that, but the islanders aren't happy with their arrival. One of the men is killed, and Bligh quickly realises that in order to salvage his own reputation and to mete out justice to the mutineers, he is going to have to find a European settlement, which he will do in Timor. The problem being that it's 4,000 miles away. So they essentially have to sail in an open boat, and it's 47 days at sea in an open boat to Timor.
Timor was a Dutch trading post. It was where he would be able to get help. At that point, Australia had been discovered by the Dutch but hadn't been claimed by the British, so it was still quite uncertain as to what was there. And his experience on Tafur, where he lost a guy through the local natives, weighed heavily on his mind. So he sailed through Fiji. I mean, he sailed close to Vanuatu. He landed in Australia because the men were desperate and hungry. But after that, he saw natives in Australia but chose not to return back to the mainland and instead continued on to Timor.
One of the things that people don't realise is that the sheer weight of everyone on board pushes it down in the water. So there's almost no distance between the top of the open boat and the surface of the sea. So they are bailing all the time.
Oh my goodness.
So there is this constant pressure on the men that they are going to be swamped and will simply sink mid-Pacific.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I've done a lot of sailing. I wouldn't know how to dead reckon using the sun and the stars. You've been through that experience. How hard is it in the South Pacific?
It's I would say it's almost impossible. I mean, most navigation with a sextant, on a big, tall, high-sided, big, large boat. Here you're a metre above the water. To try and get a horizon shot is hard enough. I mean, I'm no expert, and certainly stars are out of my remit. But we were predominantly just going full west. So we could take a latitude noon sight and just stay on that latitude line all the way to, and we were eventually going to hit Australia. So actually, from that perspective, navigation isn't so tricky. What is tricky is obviously A, making landfall, and B, trying to go through some of these islands like Fiji. And in Fiji, we had torrential rain. We had no chance of getting any sun sights. So the only thing we could do was dead reckon between islands, more like the sort of Polynesian style of navigation, where they would have looked for bird life, they would have looked for the clouds, they would have looked for rain patterns and water, warm water currents and so on. But certainly around the Fijian island, you're heading to one very big high island, and then you're saying, well, the next island is
next one on the
20
left.
degrees there. It's 500 miles away. We're going to go that way, and so on, which actually was remarkably effective. But I would love to have the skills that Bligh had. I mean, he's the sort of person who would have gone dum 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 with 3 stars and would have been within 5 miles of where he wanted to be.
And that boat had been given to them thinking it would just get them to the nearest island, a couple of miles away.
Yes, so the mutineers imagine it will be a very short trip, sail, they've got a few supplies on board, and now Bligh is left to try and make supplies eke out for an unknown time, because they do not know how long it will take them to get to Timor.
He was cast adrift with 28 gallons of water. He had 150 pounds of salted pork, some ship's biscuits. So they had enough food really for a week. He would literally divide everything out. They fought, they caught some boobies, some seabirds. They caught a turtle and various other bits and pieces, but it wasn't until they got to Restoration Island where they feasted on oysters on the oyster beds. In fact, we landed on the same beach and ate off the same oyster beds as Bligh.
This is the coconut cup that he eats his ration from, which is inscribed W. Bligh. Taken from the Bounty are a small horn beaker. Now, that is the water ration each man received 3 times a day.
Wow.
So it is a minute amount.
It's a gulp of water,
a gulp of water
mouthful.
3 times a day. So you can imagine that not only are they dehydrated, they are also malnourished, and they are in fear of their life from being swamped by the sea. And then finally mounted is a little musket ball which Bligh used to weigh out the biscuit or bread ration. So you can see that they're really getting a tiny amount to eat.
And it's mounted on a sort of maybe a piece of brass or something, but you mean that the musket ball itself?
The musket ball itself was used to weigh out the bread ration, so they really are getting...
That's a speck.
Yeah,
speck of
very
bread.
little.
He arrived in Timor with probably another week's worth of rations left. He'd been so harsh with the rations. And actually, he quelled a couple of mutinies on board the little boat because of food. He caught, one person stealing food and so on.
And what about discipline on that original expedition? I mean, did he manage to hold it together? It must have just been as far as you can push the human spirit.
Well, his sailing master was a continuous sort of pain throughout the whole voyage, and had been so during on HMS Bounty as well. But when they were cast adrift, he quite rightly had to bring this guy back into line. For 18 people in a small environment like this, you only need one rotten apple to turn the whole barrel bad. And I still look at that moment in time and think of Bligh's leadership, to keep morale, to keep a sense of we can get to there. He never really doubted his own belief that he would arrive in Timor. With men that were starving and desperate, I think it's still extraordinary leadership in my view.
Traditional wooden sailing boats are so sophisticated for their time, but they do depend on the muscle power of the crews to get set up. Sails need manhandling into just the right position to catch the wind. Okay, so this is the halyard. So this is the rope holding up the mainsail, basically. Okay, here we go. Right, there we go.
Lay that one down.
Okay, and then
Grab the top of the yard. That's it. Swing it through.
Okay, there we go. There we
Grab
go.
this one.
There we go.
That's it. Pull that one back up.
Come on. Yes, we've backed the foresail. Oh, I'm getting the hang of this. No, I'm not. Oh, there's the halyard. Okay, here we go. Down she comes. Right, go through there.
That's it.
So which end's which?
Yeah, you need to grab the back end.
That's the back end, isn't it?
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Come on. Speed is of the essence.
You've got it.
There we go. So you were doing this as you're going through the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, yeah, we attempted to do that exact manoeuvre through the Barrier Reef. In fact, it was a jibe, but we very nearly ended up on the reef because the crew just couldn't figure out how to get the sails round the right way. I don't think Bligh would have had that problem because his men would have known exactly what they were doing. Woo! Whereas most of my crew didn't really know.
As it became clear that Bligh was getting them to a safe destination, did that almost become easier? Because they said, actually, this guy does know what he's doing. He's sailing us between these reefs. And
Well, it's perfectly clear that the men knew that Bligh was an accomplished navigator. That was not in doubt. The problem being that as time went on, and it's 47 days at sea, the men were being weakened by exposure and malnutrition and dehydration, and they essentially were giving up hope. So Bligh's task essentially is to try and keep the men going, and he does. I mean, they all arrive in Timor alive, if not entirely well. The irony is many of them died when they arrived in Timor, succumbing to fever and the results of the voyage.
And so Bligh survives. What about the mutineers?
Well, the mutineers take the Bounty back to their beloved Tahiti. On Tahiti, they will undoubtedly be discovered. So Fletcher Christian and a group of the mutineers and some locals decide to sail off, and they pitch up at Pitcairn Island. Of course, as we know, descendants of Christian and the mutineers still occupy Pitcairn today.
So the Navy do catch up with the people on Tahiti. They execute some of them.
Yep.
But the ones on Pitcairn get away with it.
Essentially, although they do have a tough time on the island, and we've got evidence of the last of the mutineers just round the corner. So this is his grave marker, a piece of wood covered in lead sheeting from Pitcairn. And we also have his pigtail here and his sea chest. So the sort of notoriety of the mutiny on the Bounty was still current even in the early 19th century. The mutiny on the Bounty has held a continual fascination in the sort of public imagination ever since, with the character of Bligh and of Fletcher Christian being recast for each generation.
So John Adams lived to quite a ripe old age on Pitcairn.
He did, yes. So he's actually the last of the mutineers to survive on the island. And as it says on his grave marker, he dies in March 1829, which is essentially 15 years after the Royal Navy had rediscovered Pitcairn and identified the mutineers there. But by that stage, the sort of heat had gone out of the controversy.
So he was allowed to sort of maintain his place running this little island.
Yeah.
You've done more sailing than nearly anyone else alive. Did you learn something about sailing and about yourself when you were sailing this open boat?
You know, I did. I learned a hell of a lot about not just how resourceful we are as humans. I mean, it can become quite sort of cliche, but if you strip ourselves back to our absolute nothing, whether it's food or clothing or and put ourselves through that environment, we are resilient enough to cope with it. The experiment in terms of could we match what Bligh's men did in today's world is yes, we can. We absolutely are made of stern stuff.
That open boat voyage, and it's one of the most remarkable voyages ever undertaken.
Yes, I think so. It's probably up there with Ernest Shackleton's voyage to South Georgia. Shackleton probably faced much harsher conditions, but of course it was a much shorter voyage.
Well, every boat is different. That's what makes sailing so wonderful. And this one's got its own particular characteristics just from the few hours I've been aboard. I love it, but it feels incredibly solid. It's like sailing a massive oak wardrobe across the ocean. And that means you're not going to get in trouble. You might even be able to bounce off the odd reef, but it's also not going to win any medals in the Olympic regatta. But it doesn't matter because it's a thing of extreme beauty. And if the wind's in the right place, you could take this on a journey thousands of miles long. The idea of curling up here on these wooden planks and spending the night after night, exposed to the heavens, salt water coming over the side, just unimaginable. And the fact that Bligh and his men were doing that with completely unreliable charts, if any charts, and with not enough food and drinking water, it's one of the greatest feats of seamanship in history. Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss any of our great films that are coming out. Or if you are a true history fan, check out our special dedicated history channel, historyhit.tv. You're going to love it.